All right. Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday afternoon to you. We thank you for joining us on these bi-weekly calls, and certainly we thank you for including us on your journey as you navigate business and entrepreneurship on the Eastern Plains during this time. We certainly appreciate being able to share part of that with you. Let's go to the next slide. I want to take a moment to do something that I haven't often done since we started these calls, and that is explicitly call out everyone who helps put these together. So on a weekly basis, there's probably a dozen people that are working together to put all of this together for you guys. And so a few of them you don't ever get to see. They're not very visible on our calls, but not being visible doesn't mean they're not important. So we want to make sure that you guys have heard of them. The Telluride Foundation and Northwest Colorado SBDC in particular have not made visible appearances on our call, and the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. But each of those have a very important role in bringing these to you each week or every other week now. I also want to make sure and call out the Startup Colorado team. Their team certainly carries the bulk of the load behind the scenes and are very integral to what we're doing. And we've had a few appearances by their team, but a little less visible. Then later on, actually just in a few minutes, you'll get to see Lisa of the East Colorado SBDC, and then Jamie from the Central Mountain SBDC will be taking us to the finish line a little bit later. So I really want to thank all of those. It's quite a lift to get this put together each time, and we really appreciate that support. Let's go to the next slide. Also want to make sure that everybody is aware, along with the collaboration to bring you these, we also need your input a little bit later. So I want to give you just a heads up that a little bit later, we're going to ask you to participate in a poll. There's going to be 2 different questions that show up on your screen. And we want your input to help us guide the content that we source for these calls, and to make sure that we are responsive and attentive to what would be most helpful for you. So today's call, we've got going to spend some time talking about insurance and the different insurances and considerations that each of you might be either experiencing or needing to consider at this point as you navigate the current environment. Also going to hear from Joe Reinhardt from the Main Street Phoenix Project, and then have some wrap-up items for you, as well as question and answer. So as I get ready to turn this over to Lisa, I want to encourage everybody to use that Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen. We'll be getting to as many of the questions as possible live today on the call as well. Happy to follow up with those that we don't get to. And for those of you who join us via the video stream on YouTube, either live or the recording, feel free to use the comment section to interact with us, and we will certainly be responsive to those questions and that input as well. So with that, I want to introduce Lisa and have you take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, John. All right, let's go to our next slide, please. And welcome to Wednesday afternoon. I have the pleasure of introducing our first guest to speak on business interruption. We have Brad Levine and Nelson Wanaka from Levine and Sitkoff Attorneys at Law. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brad and Nelson to take it from here. If you gentlemen would like to turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves, you can take it away.
Thanks, appreciate it, Lisa. So first of all, let me just introduce you, to us. Nelson and I are with a law firm in Denver that specializes in insurance. We represent policyholders when they have any types of disputes with insurance carriers. And certainly the issues we're going to be talking about today are very relevant, very cogent. In fact, I can just tell you for the last several weeks, we have been involved, in a very comprehensive manner with insurance issues that are related to the COVID-19 epidemic. Nelson and I are going to be talking about a particular form of insurance. It's business interruption insurance, which I know has got to be of interest and potentially of real concern to a number of folks who are listening today. It certainly is impacting businesses all over the state of Colorado, the epidemic. And the question is, what to do about it? Do you have insurance coverage for various losses? So we'll be talking about business interruption, and then Drew and Sarah are going to be talking about liability insurance, which is a different form of coverage under applicable insurance policies. So first of all, let's go to the next slide. Let's, talk about, what's this animal when we talk about business interruption coverage? Could I have the next slide, please? Now, if you have a commercial policy, and and let me just tell you, when we're talking about a commercial policy, that's going to be a policy that is specific to your business. And when we're talking about that, again, that's going to be separate and apart from an individual policy that you might have on your home, separate from an automobile policy that you might have on your car, separate and apart from an umbrella policy that would be over and above your individual policies. We're talking about a policy that is specific to your business. And whether or not you're aware of it, whether or not when you purchased the policy, you were told by your agent or broker that you have, as part of the property coverages, that you have business interruption coverage, it is there. It's a standard type of coverage that's going to be present as part of the property coverages. And when we're talking about property coverages, we're talking about loss directly to the business, for example, because you have a fire, you have a water loss, you have a burglary loss, whatever it may be. The question is what happens if you have a loss of business income that stems from that property loss? And policies generally are going to cover those. So again, if we're talking about you own your business, and you're going along, and then you have, like I say, you have a fire that occurs on your premises. You have a water main break, and you've got water that's going all over the place, and it causes you to have to shut down your business. If you have someone break into your business premises, they steal vital equipment and so on, and as a consequence, there's going to be some kind of loss. There's going to be a delay. You're going to have to shut down. You're not going to be able to have customers on your premises for some period of time. So what we're talking about when we're talking about business interruption insurance is compensating you, providing you with insurance where you've incurred losses, not just simply to rebuild because of the fire, not just having to bring in some kind of restoration company to clean things up because of the water loss, or you've got a hail loss that damaged the roof, and you have leaks in there and you can't have customers there. If as a consequence of that loss that you've suffered a loss of income, then you have potential coverage under your policy. So then the question is, what types of coverages are there? What types of perils are we talking about? So let's go to the next slide, please. So if we're talking about your premises, like I say, we've got fire, theft, wind, water damage, something like that happens on your premises. It may be that something occurs off your premises that has a direct effect on your business. So let's take, for example, that down the street from you, that there's a fire. at another business. And as a consequence, the fire department not only ropes off and doesn't allow people into your premises for that day, but that there's smoke damage, there's asbestos exposure, and as a consequence, the authorities say, you're not going to be able to have your business open for the next week or the next couple of weeks while they're remediating what might have occurred, like I say, down the street from you. That's where you've had a closure because of a civil or military authority. Okay. Maybe there's some kind of restriction on the ingress and egress from your property. And that's again because of whatever it is that's happened. Maybe your business premises, everything's all right there, but people can't get in and out of there because of again some kind of property loss that's occurred. There's also what's called loss of attraction property. So let's say that, for example, if you have, if you're in a shopping center, and one of the mainstays, one of the drawing cards for your shopping center is a Ferris wheel. And so you have, people come in the evening, particularly during the summer nights, they come and they're going to the Ferris wheel, maybe other kinds of attractions, other, parts of a circus might be there. And you get ancillary business because of that. And let's say something happens to that attraction property. And again, as a consequence, your business suffers loss. Those would be circumstances under your policy that you might be able to recover compensation from the insurance company because of those losses. Let's go to the next slide. So then the question is, well, what do I get compensation for? How much money do I get? You have to submit what's called a proof of loss. That's something that's required under your policy, in which you basically tote up the damages and you tell the insurance company, these are the losses and these are how I calculated. And the insurance company will probably come out, they'll have an adjuster go out and take a look. And maybe have somebody, and maybe have an accountant take a look at if you've had to go to your business records in order to calculate what the amount of your loss is, and they might have to check through that and so on. In general, if you look at the policy, and by the way, when we're talking about insurance policies, those are contracts. It's just like any other type of contract that you enter into. Of course, the difference here is that often if you're talking about entering into a lease agreement, or if you're, you enter into a contract with a supplier, you look at that and, you might negotiate the terms of that document. Typically, you're not going to be in a position to be able to negotiate with your insurance company with respect to the terms in that policy. They give it to you. It's basically on a take it or leave it basis, which, by the way, has other kinds of legal implications, because it is on a take it or leave it basis that creates certain obligations that the insurance company has to deal with you in good faith. But you look to that policy in order to define exactly what it is that you might be able to get under your business interruption coverage. So for example, the policy will generally provide for your loss of your net income. All right. And the definition of what constitutes your net income is going to be set forth in the policy itself. And in fact, it'll give you some pretty exquisite detail about how it is that you calculate what the amount of your income loss is on a net basis. Obviously, taking into account, how much money you had to spend for products and then how much you were going to receive and so on, what your net income is. Some policies also provide for compensation for lost profits. And one way you might look at the question of your lost profits is to go back on an annual basis for the last 5 years and say, okay, during the month of June, which is a time frame that I have a lot of traffic because I live in an area where we've got, it's during the summer and leisure activities and so on, and that obviously goes up and down, and June's really a good month for us, and we receive, a lot of profits, and we were deprived of those profits because of the property loss that I suffered on my premises or because of what happened down the street from me. So you have the potential for getting lost profits. And again, it's a matter of proof. It's how you establish it. You go back to those books and records you've had for the last year, last few years, and establish the amount of your profits that you received in past years and how it is that you had a loss of profits in the particular years that was affected because of your property loss. And you can get that from your insurance company. But there's typically in the policy, there's going to be a limitation on how much you're able to recover. And that's going to be usually bounded by time. In other words, there's going to be a period of restoration that is going to be set forth in the policy. Typically, most policies provide for a 90-day period of restoration. So that's the time in which, the insurance companies have said, okay, in order for you to be, back and up and running after that water loss, after, things have gotten dried out, you've been able to replace the equipment that was damaged because of the water, that you've been able to dry it out, take care of any kind of mold damaged parts of the property. 90 days seems like an outside period of time that you should be able to get your property restored. So that's the period of time that you're going to be able to receive compensation from your insurance company for your business interruption loss. Let's go to the next slide. Maybe asking yourself, well, how do I know whether or not I even have this animal that, that Brad's talking about, this business interruption? First of all, what I can tell you is that in general, if you've got a commercial property policy, as opposed to, like I say, an individual type policy, if you own or you lease a commercial space, and as part of that, the requirements either for leasing under your lease agreement, or because it's just prudent, if you're going to have property, you want to make sure your property is going to be covered in the event of any type of calamity that might occur. You probably have, as I say, the commercial property insurance, and that's going to include, in addition to liability insurance and other types of insurance, provisions in there for if you have employees, right, to cover any kind of losses because of let's say dishonest employees, whatever it may be, you're going to have property insurance. So if you have that, or if you have equipment in your business, if you have any type of policy you've obtained for your business, you typically are going to have business interruption coverage as part of that. The place to look is what's called the declarations page. The declarations page is after the very first page of your policy, or sometimes it actually is the first page. It's going to be declarations, and those basically is a page or two, or maybe more than that, that set forth the various coverages that you have, the premiums that you paid for the coverages, and the extent of coverage that you have, for example, your liability limits and so on. It will also include what is the maximum amount of coverage you have for property insurance, and there likely has what are the limits of your business interruption policy. And if you have any questions about it, all you got to do is pick up the phone, send an email to your agent or to the insurance carrier itself, and ask them, what do I have? How am I covered for this? Because you want to make sure that the amount of your coverage is commensurate with the nature of your operation, the value of your property, to make sure you're properly insured. So those are just, like I say, some of the very general parameters of what business interruption coverage under a policy is. What I'm going to have now is I'm going to ask Nelson to step in and talk very specifically about issues that are pertinent to what everybody in this entire state is facing. My law firm is facing as a small business, which has to do with the issues involving COVID-19. And as I say, that's something that our law firm has been dealing with, immersed in for the last several weeks. So Nelson, why don't you talk specifically about issues related to COVID-19?
Happy to. Thanks, Brad. So as Brad mentioned earlier, business interruption coverage is a subset of commercial property coverage. So the overall point here is you have some sort of a loss to a commercial property, okay, whether it's your storefront, your offices, and then as a result of that, your business can't perform at all or as well, and you lose money, okay? And that makes it's an easy to understand concept with typical losses, that everybody knows about, like fire and hail or water damage. But it's a more nuanced question with something like COVID-19. And the three biggest issues, as reflected on this slide, are, well, does COVID-19 even cause property damage? But all these policies, business interruption policies, require direct physical loss of or damage to covered property. And so what's happening now is insurance companies have taken the position, as I'll explain later, that, well, no, it doesn't. And at first blush, that it kind of makes a lot of sense. If you think of if a restaurant, for example, has COVID-19 in it, or is suspected to have COVID-19 in it and is closed down, everything about that restaurant is, for all intents and purposes, or at least for all appearances, normal. It hasn't sustained any damage, but that's not actually true, as I'll also explain later. And another big issue that we're facing with business interruption and COVID-19 is, well, what is causing the business interruption? Is it the virus itself, or is it the government mandated closures, or is it both? So we'll talk about that. And then another issue is the presence of virus exclusions in business interruption policies. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. There are policies that contain virus exclusions. So you want to say you have business interruption coverage, you make a claim, and they say your policy's got a virus exclusion. So that's something some insureds have to be aware of. Not every policy has it. Certainly a coverage lawyer can answer that question for you in 5 or 10 minutes, whether you have that exclusion or not. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, well, I'll just go on. So the status of COVID-19 claims is that there's been thousands of them filed throughout the country. And Brad and I were talking about this earlier. We're unaware of a single case. We've narrowed it down to the United States, but we're aware of one case in France where it's been paid, but we are unaware of a single instance in the United States where an insurance company has paid a COVID-19 claim. That doesn't mean that that's a correct decision, okay? And that's something, if you gain one thing from this presentation, it's just because an insurance company tells you that something is not covered doesn't mean they're always right. There are good arguments, as I hope you'll see, that you can challenge these determinations. If an insurance company says that your claim, COVID doesn't involve physical damage, you can challenge it. You can hire a lawyer to look at it. If they say any of these other things, you have those options too. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Did we lose all slides now?
Also, we'll just keep going, and we'll pull up slides as you keep going.
Okay. Well, I'm usually the one that causes these problems, but I promised you that I have not touched anything regarding the slideshow. But all right, so let's talk about the direct physical loss or damage requirement of insurance policies, because I think that's the most important issue out there right now. Well, what does that mean? What does direct physical loss of or damage to property mean to the ordinary person, right? Do you have to be able to see it? Do you have to be able to smell damage? Do you have to be able to appreciate it with your senses? If COVID-19 is present on a surface or suspected to be present on a surface, has that property been physically damaged? And those are the interesting issues that sort of have to be resolved throughout the United States. There are test cases. Brad and I have brought some lawsuits that will sort of answer these questions, as have other insureds throughout the United States. But until that happens, we can look at what courts have done with similar losses that aren't directly a virus or aren't directly COVID-19, but which we can analyze too, or are similar enough. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, okay. So the first thing you do is when you're trying to figure out what physical loss or damages is, you look at the plain language of that. And insurance policies in Colorado are interpreted according to their plain and ordinary language. And physical is a really, really broad word. Most people think of it as tangible, but that's not what it means. It means of or relating to the material world and subject to the laws of nature. Okay, so COVID-19 is definitely subject to the laws of nature. It's a real thing. It's material. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but it is there. You can see it under electron microscopy. You can get sick from it regardless of whether you know it's there or can see it. You can transmit it to other people. So I think it meets the test of a physical thing in the world. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what is loss and what is damage? And it's easy to confuse those terms with, obvious, visible loss and damage, such as from a fire. But damage and loss, their plain meanings are broad enough to include any sort of harm. And that's the takeaway from this. A property can be appreciably harmed, even if it's not structurally damaged. And that's what the cases throughout the country have found. Okay, and in pressing this issue forward, what courts are going to be faced with or have to confront are all these other decisions involving physical loss and damage. And the most important one is actually from here in Colorado. And it's a Colorado Supreme Court case from 1968 called Western Fire versus Presbyterian Church. And it involved gas vapors. Now, I understand that, gas vapors they're different from COVID-19 in probably every sense of the word, but they're also super similar in that you can't really see them. They don't damage the structure, right? But they're dangerous. And so you had this church in that case that was filled with gasoline vapors from a gas leak somewhere down the road. And the fire department came in and shut it down. They submitted an insurance claim. And the insurance carrier said, wait a minute. You don't have property damage. Your church is fine. Look at it. It's standing there. People could go in if they wanted to. Nothing's broken. But the Colorado Supreme Court said, no, that's not the analysis that we're going to take in Colorado. This church can't use its building at all. That building is uninhabitable. It's useless. And that qualifies in the presence of something like gas vapors, and I would argue COVID-19, as a physical loss of or damage to the property. And since that case came down in 1968, it's actually sort of been the bellwether case, the leading case. And there's now 30 to 40 opinions throughout the country that have dealt with similar circumstances. Probably the most notable of them is a recent decision, by recent, I mean 2015, from the New Hampshire Supreme Court, where they held that cat urine odor constitutes physical damage. I think it's difficult for an insurance company to say that something as dangerous as COVID-19 doesn't cause physical loss of or damage to property when cat urine odor can. And there are tons of other examples too. I mean, asbestos fibers, toxic chemicals, methamphetamine fumes, environmental spills, and my personal favorite is an infestation of brown recluse spiders in the Midwest was held to constitute property damage. So all of those analogize well to COVID-19. Finally, in Colorado, we have a public policy argument that COVID-19 constitutes physical damage because the Governor Polis, and the executive director of the Colorado Department of Health stated in written executive orders that COVID-19 physically contributes to property damage. That's in the slides that are available, and we're having some trouble with them right now. But the bottom line is this: if you think you might have business interruption coverage, call your agent, call your insurance company, try to find out whether you have it, ask for a copy of your policy, and make a claim if you do have that coverage. Even if you if you doubt whether it's going to be covered, make a claim. The worst thing they do is say, no, you don't have that coverage, or no, it isn't covered. If you have additional questions, contact an experienced insurance coverage lawyer. If you ever get a letter or a phone call from an insurance company that says you do have business interruption coverage, you've made a claim, but we don't think COVID-19 is physical damage, or we think a virus exclusion applies, or any other reason, press forward. These are not set in stone. Just because an insurance company says no doesn't mean a court will agree with them. You have lots of remedies available to you under the law if the insurance company is wrong. And at that time, you need to be contacting a lawyer. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I'm going to hand things over now to Sarah Wallace and Drew to talk about general liability coverage.
Thanks, Nelson. And before we jump in with Sarah and Drew, I'd like to just encourage those that are on the webinar today that if you have questions, make sure that you're utilizing that Q&A. We'll have a few minutes after Sarah and Drew to address any questions that pop up. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sarah Wallace and Drew Petrie from Ballard Spahr to talk about commercial general liability coverage. So Sarah and Drew, I will pass the torch to you.
Thank you, Lisa. This is Drew. Sarah is going to be fairly quiet. She's going to mainly serve to correct me when I make mistakes, since she took the laboring oar earlier today. Comprehensive general liability policies, or what we call CGL coverage, are the types of policies that a lot of businesses will get because a landlord requires them to have that type of coverage. Or independently, if your business is significant enough, you'll get this type of broad, it's comprehensive business coverage. And so the question becomes, does this type of CGL policy apply to these COVID-19 types of issues that are creeping up?
Yes.
Hello?
I'm good, Sam, and it's so funny. I'm listening to a conference call that I had to be on today, but you were on I was going to call you. I'm trying to, in fact, while I'm
mute their line. Thanks. The question with the CGL coverage is going to have some parallels to what Brad talked about, because these are contracts, and so your rights do rely on what's in your contract. They are prepared largely by the insurance companies. The standard form contract is very much prepared by the insurance company, and where you as an insured get your leverage or your opportunity to negotiate somewhat is where you put on the endorsements and negotiate exclusions where there can be changes in language. So the question becomes, what are the types of claims that might give rise to a CGL coverage? So if we look at the third slide here, advance one, please. The types of claims that we've been seeing are the claims where a business hasn't properly prepared itself to reopen again or to remain open during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you have issues with customers, people who come on the premises, or other folks. We'll be seeing some, we believe, for students. We'll be seeing some for contractors and construction sites. And the question then becomes, are these types of things going to be likely to be covered? Sarah pulled out 3 good examples, if we can advance to the next slide, just to give you a feel for the breadth of the type of things we're looking at. Everyone saw those terrible pictures of the cruise lines where folks were trapped on the boats for weeks and weeks and couldn't dock anywhere. And that's led to a bunch of claims that the crew members weren't properly prepared and did not properly protect themselves from the customers and protect the customers from the crew members. The second example is the suits against the folks who did the hand sanitizer, who are saying you misadvertised what your hand sanitizer could do. And then the other examples everyone's seen, I'm sure, are the nursing home residents, who essentially are then trapped in these facilities where they're not properly being taken care of. And those are the types of potential claims that you can see. And one reason to focus on these types of claims is that even though if you can jump to the next slide, please. Even though they're hard to prove, how do you prove that you picked up the COVID-19 virus at a particular place or from a particular person versus the store next door, the 7-Eleven around the corner, et cetera? They become very expensive to defend. And so the important, or one of the important concepts of CGL insurance is that not only is there a potential for indemnity, meaning at the end of the day, the insurance carrier will pay the claims, there's also the possibility that the insurance carrier will pay for the defense of a claim that's been asserted. So even though it may seem a little bit backwards, let's start with the indemnity concepts, and then we'll come back and talk about the defense concepts. And so if you could jump 2 slides up, please. So as I said, indemnity is, at the end of the day, will the carrier actually pay the claim that's been asserted? And that can sometimes be years in the future. But what happens is when you assert a claim, an insurance carrier has to make a determination as to whether there's the possibility of coverage, whether it will provide a defense, and whether it will reserve its rights to later contest the fact that you never had a right to coverage in the first place. Now, the duty to defend, if we can jump to the next slide, please, is independent of the ability or the duty to indemnify the claim. So as there's something called the 4 corners rule, that if the complaint that's brought against you alleges within the 4 corners of that piece of paper a claim that is potentially covered, then the insurance company has the obligation to defend you. Even if at the end of the day, there's a determination that the claim was not in fact covered, and even though the claim might appear to be frivolous on its face. The fact of the matter is, you look at the claim that's brought against you and say, if that is true, would there be coverage under the policy? And if potentially coverage, and if so, would the insurer have to defend? So I've jumped forward a little bit. Let's go to slide 11, please. Other direction. Keep going, please. One more. So this is what your CGL policy covers. It's bodily injury and property damage. And Brad gave us a nice primer on some of the ins and outs of property damage. And those injuries, whether bodily injury or property damage, must be caused by an occurrence. And the best layperson's way to look at whether they were caused by an occurrence is whether this was the result of an accident, something that you couldn't expect, something that you did not intend. So looking to bodily injury, if we can advance to slide 12, please. This is the standard policy definition of bodily injury: sickness or disease sustained by a person, including resulting from any of these at any time. And so if you look at that as a layperson on its face, it seems like if somebody came into your premises and picked up COVID and could prove it, or alleged that they picked it up in your premises, that would be bodily injury. And then the next question becomes, is it caused by an occurrence? In other words, was it accidental? If you can jump to the next slide, please. The test, as I said, for determining whether it's an occurrence is as we set forth here. So it would, once you're sort of on notice that you have a problem, a continuous or repeated exposure is going to be considered part of the same issue. What you can see is how people would be alleging that they received or were exposed to the virus on your premises, and that they will blame you for that. And we believe that the carriers are going to argue that this was either an expected injury or potentially even intended, because of the fact that it's been widely publicized, the steps that one needs to take in order to prevent being held liable for expanding the pandemic by not properly protecting customers, visitors, etc. You have a lot of government edicts out there. You have a lot of media coverage, some good, some bad, some appropriate, some not. But there's a lot of information out there about what people need to do. And that cautions for everyone that following those guidelines is always a good response, because you then, if you have an issue and need to rely on your insurance coverage, one of the first things you can say is, I followed all of the government directives and warnings, therefore this had to be an accidental exposure. Now, if we can jump to the next slide, please. The exclusions are something we can only touch upon because they are many. And as I said, they tend to be a little more customized. We've picked some of the standard ones here. There are communicable disease exclusions in some policies, not in all. There are, as we've noted here, an exclusion that people have pointed to for organic pathogens, including microbes. Your easiest response to that is that the virus is not a microbe. Those are two very separate scientific beasties. And so you don't need to worry about that exclusion, but that's not going to prevent the insurance carrier for throwing it up as a possible reason to deny you your coverage and your defense. So moving on to the next set of exclusions. Most modern CGL policies include a pollution exclusion. While we don't think it's going to be successful, we can envision a scenario where you can essentially have somebody come into your store coughing and wheezing and hacking and sneezing, seems to be infected with COVID. They leave, you don't take any action to follow up on it, and a clever carrier could turn around and say, essentially, that person polluted your store. And the insurance companies have, for decades now, said they're not going to cover insurance, provide insurance coverage for pollution. They're only going to do it pursuant to separate policies and separate forms of coverage that are enormously expensive. The last one I want to touch on is the expected or intended exclusion, which, as I indicated before, says if it's an injury, if it's bodily injury or it's property damage that you expected or intended, then the carrier will deny you coverage and deny you defense. And the expected or intended, this probably comes as no surprise, is going to be measured based on 20/20 hindsight. You'll have to fight long and hard to show what you actually thought versus what people view today looking backwards. So if we can jump to the next slide, please. Or have I hit the end? Well, mercifully, I've hit the end. So one final point to tie up, and this mirrors what you've heard before, and that is the insurance industry is an entire industry based on the word no. So don't be discouraged if you get a no out of the blocks. Keep pushing, get together with your insurance agent, your insurance broker, another insurance professional, or an insurance lawyer, and make sure you know your rights before you just take no as an answer and give up. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Drew, Sarah, Brad, and Nelson, for all of that really great information. And we did have a little bit of a glitch with our slides, but we are going to have those available on the eastcoloradosbdc.com website. And we'll touch on that again here at the end. Without any questions right now, we're going to jump into our resource update with the Main Street Phoenix project. And I'd like to introduce Joe Reinhardt to kick this off. So Joe, take it over.
Great. Thank you all so much for having me and for joining us here on this call. My name is Joe Reinhardt, and I am one of the co-founders of the Main Street Phoenix project and worker cooperative. And I know that every business owner and every business supporter on this call is hoping that all of their businesses that they're working with and their business makes it through the downturn without a hiccup. And honestly, I'm here to talk a little bit about today about a strategy for transitioning out of businesses that may not make it through the through this economic downturn and artificially induced crisis, and doing so in a way that takes care of your employees, yourself, and your community through an employee ownership transition. And so we are a brand new organization, and if you could just next slide. We're a brand new organization, fiscally sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, put together through a bunch of long-term social impact business practitioners and a legal team and a lot of long-term restaurateurs. And what we're doing is we're putting together a social impact restaurant group that will allow business owners, restaurant owners to transition either fully or partially out of their business, get a new equity investment into their business that brings it into part of an employee-owned restaurant group, and then that business is able to stay open, the staff is able to keep their jobs, and it's really like the sort of best of all possible worlds in what is a very tough situation. So going to the next slide. We are putting together, so we are a group of restaurant experts and practitioners, and we're really focused on saving restaurants in a way that makes them more economically viable in the long run by including them in a group, by including them in a restaurant group. And so the way that would basically work is, next slide. We're bringing together social impact capital from CDFIs, community banks, impact investors, and startup funding from grant making organizations to purchase the existing businesses, existing restaurants specifically for us. Then those business owners are able to either stay on as part owners and sort of in collaboration with us, taking home profits and then transitioning out more slowly. This is especially true, I think, if there's probably a lot of business owners right now out there who are thinking, man, I made it through 2008. I made it through the uptick in the economy, but I don't want to go through another recession and another rebuilding phase. And that's, I think we definitely think about this as a real good option for folks like that. And so we'll be working with business owners to help them transition out of their business elegantly or to stay on as part of our team. And the great thing here is that we're really committed to, next slide, we're really committed to taking care of the employees in the business. This is, an entirely sort of non-profit. It's we've got outside investors, but they're sort of committed to a very fixed and limited return. And so this is by and large a nonprofit effort sponsored by a Colorado-based nonprofit. And so we're looking to, how do we improve the career pathways for employees? How do we improve sort of benefits by bringing people in as part of a group? I know so many of the restaurateurs we talk to aren't able to offer the amount of training they want to offer, the amount of benefits they want to offer, spend the amount of time coordinating the schedules, bringing people into the financials, bringing employees into the whole, sort of helping run the company, because they're busy business owners. You can't do it as a one-person shop. And so we think as part of a group that we will be able to offer more of that stuff, more of that benefits of an economy of scale to employees, and also then to the enterprise. So we sort of look at these businesses, we think that there'll be increased resilience and improved profits over time as part of a group. And so that's really the whole pitch here, is just to let you know that there are people out there, many people, next slide. We're just dealing with so many business owners and so many restaurateurs who are closing up and walking away. And we're just trying to get the word out to let people know that there's another set of opportunities out there for restaurant owners. If you're, thinking of walking away and just shuttering and liquidating, that's not your only option. You also probably have the option to sell to private equity, maybe if you're in a town that's a little bit more, got a lot more tourist traffic. But this is one opportunity that can be seized for you, for workers, and for the community that you're in. And so we would encourage folks in the restaurant industry, especially, to reach out to us. And then, employee ownership is a great option. I've been working in this for about 10 years. Employee ownership is a great option for business owners generally to think about succession planning. If you've got a few years left, you want to sell the business, the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center is available to help more broadly, people think about how do I get a market price for my business, especially as we've moved back into good economic times. How do I get a market price for my business and also make sure my employees are taken care of who've worked in the business for years? How do I make sure that that happens? That's really the work of the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. So if you've got longer term plans to transition out and want help with employee focused succession planning, you can also reach out to them. Again, I'm able to stick around for questions, and we are available anytime. Just drop us an email.
Thank you, Joe. I do agree. We need to keep our restaurants open, and we certainly need to find more opportunities for employee ownership. So thank you so much. Well, I don't know about each of you, but that was an incredible amount of content. And as small business owners, we're also busy operating our businesses. So I want to make sure that you're aware that we have free legal assistance through coloradocovidrelief.org, and also free consulting and access to funding and resources through our SBDC network, coloradosbdc.org. So please reach out to us. For our July 22nd call, we're planning a marketing webinar entitled Beyond Belief, Social Media. And they're prompting me because I didn't connect with our polls. So I would like to ask our first question, which is for July 22nd call, we are planning the Beyond Social Media with Nancy Murphy with Region 10. Does this topic interest you? I'll give you 30 seconds to answer yes, no, or maybe. So we'll wait just a few more minutes and tally that result. So do we have results yet? So for our question 2, in these calls, we cover the following content. Which do you most value? Please choose one. Timely updates with national, state, regional business support or organizations and agents, or trends and insights both locally and nationally, or nuts and bolts business mechanics and educational webinars. We'll give you about 30 seconds to reply. I think perhaps we should have had all of the above, but we really do need your insights so that we know how to give you the relevant information that you would like. Okay, and then do we have any results that we can share? If not, if you're watching replay on live stream on YouTube, please add your answers in the comments, because we really do need to hear what you find that you need to learn and what's relevant to you. So thank you for taking the poll, and we look forward to hearing the live stream YouTube. Next, this is really important. The Paycheck Protection Program has reopened until August 8th. The extension keeps money coming to you for small businesses that are struggling. And because they changed the rulings on how forgiveness is calculated, it really is a great opportunity for all small businesses. So we urge you to file. Lastly, we have slides from today's presentation, which is at eastcoloradosbdc.com, disaster relief. For more business resources, go to the coloradosbdc.org/COVID, and particularly for startupcolorado.org, they have entrepreneurial communities and programs to help entrepreneurs. So please visit that site. Lastly, questions and call recordings you can see at Choose Colorado YouTube channel. And if you still have questions, you can always go to startupcolorado@colorado.edu. Our next call is Wednesday, July 22nd at 3 p.m. and it will be on marketing and really critical needs as we move forward during COVID and recovery. So thank you for attending the Eastern call, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.